Hello, friends. I'm getting ready to begin chapter 15 of What If Cinderella Never Tried on the Glass Slipper? And it's a Twisted Tales series. This is a Disney collection. Chapter 15. The Duchess had instructed her to be back before lunch, so Cinderella walked briskly, making for the royal library. She'd visited a few times now, but always to acquire books for the Duchess. She'd never gone for herself. The library was in the southern wing of the palace, at the end of a long hall that displayed not only paintings, but also an eclectic collection of royal art, porcelain vases, sculptures of birds and trees, finely woven tapestries, and jeweled trinkets. She wandered down the corridor, skimming the paintings on the wall. There were plenty of the king and the late queen, and far too many of a man who looked like an older version of the Grand Duke, the current Duke's father, she presumed. Most of his portraits looked newer than the others, as if they'd been planted on the walls to replace what had been there before. She soon came across a portrait of a young, unsmiling Prince Charles, mounted on a magnificent stallion. "You look so serious," Cinderella said to his portrait, her shoulders shaking with humor, but her laughter soon died. The artist had also somehow managed to capture the depth in Charles's warm eyes. He couldn't have been much older than 7. The age the Duchess had said he'd been when he lost his mother. A bittersweet mix of emotions stirred inside Cinderella, but she pushed them aside as she entered the library. What book should I seek? She wondered aloud, unable to contain her excitement. One of those pirate adventures Her Highness can't seem to get enough of reading, or a book on gardening or art. I would love to paint a portrait of Mama and Papa one day. Then again, it's been so long since I've sat with a good history book. The palace library should have plenty of books on how the royal gardens came to be, or on the palace's architecture, or magic. It suddenly came to her. If there was a place for her to learn more about it and the tumult her fairy godmother had alluded to, it would be here. More tomes for Jenny, eh? The librarian, Mr. Ravel, pushed his spectacles up on the bridge of his nose and continued reading whatever was on his desk. If she keeps this up, we'll need a cart to haul back all her books once she leaves. Well, what is it today? I'd like whatever you have on the history of magic, said Cinderella. Mr. Ravel's eyes flew up from his page. Excuse me? I said I'd like, yes, I heard the first time. Mr. Ravel threw a quick glance over his shoulder. He looked worried someone might hear. Then, glowering at her, he whispered harshly, "Does Jenny think I'm hiding something from her? I told her I gave the Duke all I could before he was exiled." Everything else was destroyed. The paintings, the books, everything. This wasn't at all what Cinderella had expected to hear. Destroyed? But why? She swallowed. But it's forbidden. Obviously, you dim-wit child. But why? Why is it? He scoffed. I suppose you're too young to remember its perils. Always praying that a prince or princess wouldn't be cursed at birth by a dark fairy. The council spent years working to ban magic, and we are all better for it. The speech sounded rehearsed, like something Mr. Ravel was supposed to say. What would happen if a fairy were to sneak back into Arulas and use her magic? She would be executed, most certainly. Executed, Cinderella cried. But magic can do so much good. Why would the king... Shh! The librarian cried. Enough with the questions. We shouldn't even be discussing this. Are you trying to get me dismissed? Tell your mistress I value my position here and I don't want to hear about this ever again. Yes, Cinderella said, stricken by the librarian's outburst. Yes, sir. Good. Now, if there is nothing else... Oh, hello there. A group of young girls entered, distracting Mr. Ravel as Cinderella slipped into the library. Once she lost herself among the stacks, she let out a sigh of relief. So it was true. Magic was forbidden. Did that mean Lenore had put her life in danger by helping Cinderella go to the ball? Cinderella's thoughts spun wildly, trying to make sense of it all. She had so many questions. She spent the next hour searching the library for vestiges of the mysterious magic archive. But as Mr. Ravel had warned her, everything was gone, which only made her wonder why was magic so dangerous that there weren't even books about it. Tired and about to give up, Cinderella suddenly remembered the mysterious note she'd seen in the book she borrowed for Genevieve. We must bring magic back. Maybe 36 ships and 47 pirates can help. Art. The numbers had to mean something. 36 ships and 47 pirates. Could they be shelves and books in the library? And art. Could she find a clue in the art history collection? It was worth a try. Besides, she murmured to herself, if there used to be fairies in Arulas, then they couldn't have gotten rid of everything. There has to be something, maybe a book on painting or sculpture that refers to magic. Unfortunately, even as she pored over the books in the art section, she couldn't find anything. Shelf 36, book 47 was a volume on medieval needlepoint. Shelf 47, book 36, was a tome on painting without color. She was about to give up when she returned to the fiction section where she usually borrowed novels for the Duchess. If she couldn't find something for herself, she could at least bring Genevieve a new book. As she scanned the shelves, she wondered whether the 36 might have been 86. After all, the note had been old and smudged. There! Book 47 on shelf 86 caught her eye. It was nearly the last book in the collection, a slim volume wedged between two thicker ones. The Historical Tapestries of Pirates. Her heart jumped. That doesn't seem to belong here. The edges of the spine were singed and many of the pages ripped out. But as Cinderella closed the book, about to give up, she heard something flutter inside the book's spine. Carefully, she looked inside and pried out a tightly wrapped scroll. Art, read a label on the parchment. It was fragile with age and it crinkled under her fingertips. No, it wasn't parchment at all, but a page from an adventure novel. Much like the ones the Duchess read, a note was written in the corner. I'll meet you at the fork in the tunnels tomorrow at noon. Ferdinand intends to destroy it. Jenny. Could this note be from Duchess Genevieve? And the note in the other book she found, Art? That was the name of her husband, Arthur. Cinderella reread the note over and over again, unable to believe what she'd found. Was it the Grand Duke who'd had the magical archives destroyed? Had he aided his father in the ban? Slowly, the pieces came together. Magic must have caused the animosity between Genevieve and the Grand Duke. Was it the reason the Duke had asked Cinderella to spy on her? Before she could seek more answers, footsteps approached, and Cinderella sprang up in alarm. As quickly as she could, she rolled up the note and returned it to the book. Cinderella, what are you doing here? It was Louisa and two other seamstresses. Cinderella recognized Giselle and Victoria from Blooms and Looms, followed closely by the royal librarian. I was just getting some books for the Duchess. You, cried Mr. Ravel. You aren't allowed to be nosying around about the royal archives. I thought you'd left. I'm finished, Cinderella said quickly. So are we, said Louisa, grabbing Cinderella and her friends by the arms. Thank you for your help. Once the girls raced out of the library, Louisa gave in to a fit of giggles. Did you see how upset he was? You aren't allowed to be nosying about the royal archives. And the way he latched onto us the whole time, Victoria added, as if we were going to steal his precious books. Cinderella laughed too. Why were you three in the library? The head seamstress asked us to compile some designs for a dress for Duchess Genevieve. She's going to have a welcome banquet at some point, so we need to be prepared in case she wants a gown made for the occasion. Cinderella, you work for her. Maybe you could help us. I could, she mumbled as they passed the Hall of Portraits once more. Except this time Cinderella's eyes picked out the faded sun lines on the brocade wallpaper, a telltale sign that some paintings had come and gone. The frames for the former Grand Duke's portraits were more ill-fitting than most, and she thought of what Mr. Ravel had said about the destruction of all paintings about magic. What must have been in this hall before? Portraits of a fairy godparents to the royal family, perhaps? Cinderella, Louisa said, tapping her shoulder. Sorry, my mind was elsewhere. I've noticed, said her friend dryly. You have a habit of disappearing into your daydreams. She'll want to wear something black, Cinderella said. She doesn't talk about him often, but she's still in mourning for her husband. You think so? Said Giselle. I would have thought she'd be glad he died. He was the reason she left the palace in the first place. Do you know why he was banished? Cinderella asked. Victoria shrugged. Something about a disagreement with the king. There's an unwritten rule not to speak of it, said Louisa, glancing over her shoulder to make sure the guards couldn't hear. My father used to attend the Duke of Orleans back when I was a little girl, but he's never said anything about what happened. Not even Aunt Ermina will talk about it. Why not? Asked Cinderella. Let's just say there are spies all around the palace, and people have been dismissed for less. While the seamstresses changed topics back to what Duchess Genevieve should wear to her welcoming banquet, Cinderella listened only half-heartedly. She had a hunch the so-called spies were the Grand Dukes. Now that she'd begun to piece together the past, his role in banning magic and Arules and his fraught relationship with the Duke and Duchess of Orleans, she would have to be especially careful about what she said the next time he called for her, and ensure he never found out about her fairy godmother. Chapter 16. Ferdinand did not appreciate Genevieve's unexpected appearance in the center court stateroom. At least she had the decency to wait until the council had dissolved, but the precious time after the meeting was when he best had the king's undivided attention and could swat away any untoward ideas his rivals in court might have tried to put in the king's head. They exchanged glares as she stepped inside, her eyes glittering like the sharp emerald studded on her tiara. A smug simper rested on her face. Good heavens, how he despised that woman. However, Ferdinand knew better than to show it. He stretched his lips wide, smiling until his cheeks ached. Why, Your Highness, we were not expecting you. The king's head bobbed up, his bewildered expression echoing Ferdinand's sentiments. 5 minutes is all the time I require, Genevieve said, waving her fan at the Duke with unconcealed distaste. A thick wave of perfume assaulted his senses, and he coughed. I beg your pardon? His Majesty and I have business to discuss. We have much to review about the council meeting, and your sovereign could use a break after hours of listening to the ministers row and bicker with you, Genevieve finished for him. She turned to King George, who was struggling to stifle a yawn. His eyes hooded with fatigue, he did indeed look like he could use a rest. But Ferdinand would rather die before he ever yielded to the Duchess of Orleans. I'm afraid that is not how it is done. As the Grand Duke, as the King's sister, I must insist. I have urgent affairs to discuss with my brother. Family matters. At that, George raised a thick eyebrow in curiosity. Out, out, he said, tilting his head at Ferdinand to leave the siblings alone. But sire, there is the matter of our treaty with... That can wait. Later, Ferdinand. Hiding a grimace, Ferdinand bowed and turned on his heel, walking slowly and defiantly for the door. Once it closed on him with a resounding thud, he pulled on his mustache angrily. That woman! What right did she have to claim the king's attention? She'd been away for years. Now she's expected to waltz back into court and usurp his hard-earned position? That was not how it worked. He gave the guards by the door his most authoritative glare, and they immediately looked to the other direction as he crouched by the keyhole, hoping to catch what Genevieve was telling the king. Alas, the harridan had the cunning to keep her voice low. He couldn't make out a word. Waiting was agony. He watched the seconds tick by on his pocket watch, then gave up and reached in his pocket for a handkerchief. Drat! Where is that blasted thing? He mumbled, checking pocket after pocket. While he searched, his fingers looped through a hole in one of his pockets, and he cursed. He'd have to send it to the seamstresses for mending. The door behind him opened, and Genevieve sailed out. She looked insufferably pleased with herself. My brother will see you now. Ferdinand rose, straightening the tassels on his epaulets with a quiet grunt as he strode back into the stateroom. Inside, he found the king still in his chair, toying with 2 porcelain figurines of a boy and a girl. Perfect. Ferdinand wanted to pick up where they left off, the topic of Prince Charles's marriage. At last finding a handkerchief, Ferdinand began polishing his monocle. As I was saying, sire, before we were interrupted, I am simply trying to do what is best for the kingdom. My son getting married is what's best for the kingdom. I agree, but he needs to marry the right girl. Bah, the right girl. All this talk of bloodlines. What does it matter who he marries, so long as they make each other happy? The Grand Duke frowned. Surely you don't mean that. It's time to throw another ball, declared the king. A masquerade ball, so that way Charles will forget this mystery girl. Sire, you just threw a ball, Ferdinand said, his frown deepening. Already his mind was reeling over what cost another ball would entail, and all his careful work balancing the budget. He would have to change the king's mind, and quickly. Once George was set on something, the stubborn old man wouldn't let it go. If it's the prince's future you're concerned about, why not consider my list of eligible princesses? No more princesses. I don't have time for fiddling over peace treaties and allocating dowries and such. If it's money you're worried about, think of how much we'll save on the wedding if we just have it right here. That's not what I meant, sire. Then what better time to throw another one? The wine's been opened, the floor is already polished. But what will we say? Say? King George coughed, his thick white eyebrows knitting together. I'm the king, aren't I? We don't have to say anything. Ferdinand grimaced and crossed his arms. The king was being far too insistent about this idea. Usually he at least considered Ferdinand's suggestions, but ever since Charles had returned, and now Genevieve, everything was spiraling out of control. This is her idea, isn't it? Ferdinand said in realization, unable to mitigate the irritation in his voice. The king ignored him. Indeed. What better way to welcome my sister to the palace than with a ball? And Charles gets another chance to meet his true love. Ferdinand detected an elusive strain in George's voice, but he looked better than he had the past month. When his son had returned, so had the bloom in his cheeks and some of the vigor in his personality. Certainly his stubbornness. Ferdinand would bide his time carefully. In the meantime, he had more important issues to press. Perhaps, sire, we'd be better off trying to arrange a marriage for the prince with the Princess of Lords. An arranged marriage? You remember how that turned out for Genevieve. Also, the Lords' royal family is unbearable. Yes, but I'm sure the prince will see reason once we explain. Bah, reason. Does a young man pining for a girl with a glass slipper sound like someone is prone to reason? No, sire, but... And didn't you doubt that my plan would work? If it worked once, it can work again. King George clasped his hands together and rubbed them. All we have to do is create the right mood, invite the right girls. Ferdinand's brow furrowed. But why a masquerade? Genevieve has this idea that the boy will find true love better if he's not blinded by the girl's beauty. King George coughed. Always practical, my sister. Sire, are you all right? I'm fine, barked the king. Stop questioning me and do what I ask. Calm, Ferdinand. If the king is going to be dead set on Charles marrying, you must see to it that he selects your bride. A bride the council will thank you for choosing. I don't think that another ball is the answer. Give Charles some time, and he'll forget that girl. Then we can arrange a marriage for him with a proper princess for one of the neighboring... The ball's been decided, interrupted the king. This is your last chance, Ferdinand. Don't disappoint me again. Certainly, your majesty. The Grand Duke swept a bow, but as soon as he turned away from the king, he scowled. Things were not going as he had planned. Not at all. When he returned to his chambers, Ferdinand sank into his chair and drummed his fingers on his desk. If the king wanted to be foolish and take Genevieve's advice over his, then more drastic measures needed to be taken. The Duke needed to prepare for the worst. It stood to reason that when Charles ascended the throne, he would kick Ferdinand out of the council and replace him with some radical fool he'd met at university. Ferdinand needed to cement his power, and now, if he could finagle Charles into marrying the Princess of Lords, her father would reward him handsomely, maybe even assist on making him ambassador to Lords. The council would land him for being the engineer of such a desirable royal union. His legacy would be established and his power impossible to undermine, even for Charles. But first, Ferdinand needed an informed report from his sources within. No, sources wasn't quite right. He preferred to think of them as involuntary emissaries. The first one he would call for would be that doe-eyed servant girl, Cinderella. Chapter 17. Cinderella had a feeling as the Grand Duke peered at her through the monocle that he was mildly displeased she did not fear him. She had dreaded their meeting, to be sure, but she wasn't afraid of him, and she wouldn't pretend to be. The only person she'd ever been truly afraid of was her stepmother. But those years with Lady Tremaine were over. Young lady, I see no point in beating around the bush. I have called you here regarding a matter of critical importance to the state. The Grand Duke drummed his fingers on the gilded desk. Have you learned anything of value from Genevieve? Cinderella straightened her chair, lifting her chin so she could meet his eyes. I don't understand what you mean, Your Grace. Mostly, I brush Her Highness's hair and help her dress. She doesn't talk to me about important matters. She does not need to talk to you. That is why I installed you as her personal attendant. The Duke glowered at her. You have every opportunity to eavesdrop on her conversations, read her mail, record her comings and goings. Why, when she was away with the prince, you should have been searching her room for indications of treachery. Treachery? Cinderella repeated with a frown. By that, did he mean magic? Sir, she said carefully, why would the king's sister be a traitor? The Grand Duke leaned back against a plush cushion, steepling his long fingers before answering. Because of her husband? How else but for her subterfuge do you think he obtained his fortune? It is no secret that the Duke of Orleans passed Orleans' secrets to our enemies, weakening us among our allies, all while giving King George poor advice that nearly ruined this kingdom. What sort of advice? What does it matter? She married a traitor. She says she married a businessman, Cinderella said. The Duke's gaze intensified. So she has been talking to you. When Cinderella cringed, he leaned forward, his palms pressing against his desk. She's trying to charm you the way she's charmed the prince. Yes, her husband was a wealthy businessman, one who nearly toppled the monarchy with his treason. Everything she's told you is a lie. What else has she told you about her husband, my child? Nothing, said Cinderella, determined not to say any more. Ferdinand let out an exasperated sigh. I shan't blame you for believing the best of her. A young, simple servant girl like you couldn't possibly begin to grasp just how conniving Genevieve can be. So let me explain. When the Duke of Orleans was young, he showed great promise, so much that King Philip, King George's father, invited him to Villars to be an advisor to the throne. The king even knighted him for being a visionary, and then he betrayed the crown. Cinderella couldn't keep quiet any longer. Betrayed the crown how? She had to bite her tongue to stop herself from adding, by supporting magic? Why do you think Genevieve has lived outside Arulas for all these years? It's because her husband surrounded himself with traitors who corrupted his good judgment, such that he tried to dethrone the king. He should have been executed, but your mistress was able to save him. But in doing so, she too was exiled from Arulas. That is until last week, when the king called her back to court. The Duke twirled his mustache, as if he knew he'd succeeded in getting her attention and cooperation. You will find out more from me, Cinderella, why His Majesty has called her back. Should you succeed, I will see to it that your post in the palace is a permanent one. If you fail, well... He paused for effect. Are we clear? Cinderella pursed her lips, emotions warring inside her. The Duke's threat finally did frighten her. She was beginning to feel happy here, and finally the miserable life she led before, where she'd forced herself to live in her daydreams to get through each day, was fading in her memory. But then again, how could she live with herself if she went from serving one tyrant to another? Even if she managed to hold on to her position with Genevieve, that would change once the Duchess's visit was over. She would have to find another way to live eventually. I don't think I can do this, she said quietly. Duchess Genevieve has been kind to me, and I will not spy on her. The Duke's expression darkened. He straightened in his chair, arranging his collar. I see. Now, if you excuse me, Your Grace, said Cinderella, starting to rise. I should return to... Not so fast, he interrupted. I advise you to reconsider my most generous offer, young lady, lest your friend Louisa and her dear aunt suddenly lose their positions in the palace as well. Cinderella went very still. Louisa? Yes, replied the Duke, picking at his mustache. Though why stop there? I'm sure she has mentioned to you that her father also works in the palace. He's a steward, I believe. What a pity it would be if his position were suddenly offered to a younger, fitter man. And her mother keeps a modest dress shop in the garment quarters, a store that struggles to pay its rent. Louisa was so kind as to bring you into the royal household, but that good deed may be her family's undoing. He peered into his monocle, then wiped the lens on his coat before returning it to his eye. I would suggest you consider your loyalties very carefully. Cinderella's hands trembled at her sides. Everything was starting to sway and spin, and she gripped the end of the Duke's table for support. She couldn't be the reason Louisa was dismissed. Well, shall you reconsider? Yes, Your Grace, she whispered. His mood improved, a bounce returning to the clipped ends of his words. Very good. Now see to it that you have more to offer the next time we meet. And remember, my dear, if you are caught in the act of investigating the king's sister, I unfortunately will not be able to come to your aid, so use caution. Cinderella nodded mutely. I will summon you again in 3 days. 3 days. Cinderella walked mindlessly, her feet automatically taking her back to the Duchess's chambers. With every step, her heart hammered in her ears. What should she do now? The answer was clear. She didn't trust the Grand Duke, in spite of his sterling reputation as the king's trusted adviser. How could she help him, knowing he'd had a hand in exiling Lenore's kind? But what about Louisa's job in the palace? Cinderella squeezed her hands into fists. What will I tell him when he calls for me again? What will I say when he asks what I've learned about the Duchess? While on her way, she hurried through the portrait gallery, but this time she focused on the paintings of the Duchess. The last one of Genevieve portrayed her and her husband, a studious-looking young man, and their 3 children. It was the only portrait in the entire gallery with the Duke of Orleans. His smile was warm, and tucked into his breast pocket was a lavender handkerchief, its color matching the fan in his wife's hand. Lavender, like Cinderella's sash. Craning her neck, she leaned closer to read the spines of the books painted behind the Duke. Most of the words were too small for her to make out clearly, but she deciphered the word enchantments on one of the books. Cinderella! Cinderella! Across the hall, Louisa hurried toward her. Her friend was out of breath and her cheeks flushed with excitement. Aunt Ermina wants us back at Blooms and Looms right away. Something about an urgent announcement. What's going on? It's only a rumor, but... Louisa's hazel eyes glittered with excitement. But they say the king is throwing another ball. Another ball? The news made Cinderella furrow her brow. Did that mean the prince had given up on searching for her? Did it mean he was seeking a new bride? You go ahead, she said. I need to finish a few things for the Duchess before I come. Chin up, she told herself as Louisa headed back to the servants' quarters. Who cares about another ball anyway? You're here to make a new life, not mope over the prince. No matter how much she wanted to see him again, whatever the rumor was, whether there was to be a ball or not, Cinderella wouldn't give it a second thought. What mattered most now was finding a way to protect Duchess Genevieve and helping Louisa keep her job at the palace. And all that depended on untangling herself from the mess she'd gotten herself into with the Grand Duke Ferdinand. Chapter 18. On most occasions, Genevieve d'Orléans would have been the last person Ferdinand wanted to see. But today he sought her out. He needed information, and he didn't trust that doe-eyed servant girl to get it for him soon enough. Luckily, he knew just how to needle the king's sister. I do not recall inviting you to tea, Ferdinand, Genevieve said, receiving him frostily. I'll have coffee then, thank you. The Grand Duke snapped his fingers, sending the nearest servant into a frenzied dance to fetch a fresh pot. Genevieve glared at him as he took the seat across from her. That isn't what I meant. His cup of coffee arrived promptly. Crossing one leg over the other, Ferdinand took a sniff before sipping. "What do you want?" "Blunt as always," said Ferdinand affably. "I must say, I'm pleased to find you haven't changed after all these years. I merely wish to have a conversation with you, Genevieve. It's been so long since you've been here at court, and with all that excitement over Charles's missing bride-to-be, I haven't had a chance properly to welcome you back." Narrowing her eyes at him, Genevieve furiously swirled her spoon in her tea, creating a miniature tempest in the cup. "You welcome me back? I can't imagine whose company I'd find more venomous, yours or a viper's." "I have never understood what happened to us," Ferdinand forged on. "We were friends once, don't you remember?" "No, I do not." "We might never have trusted one another, but we respected each other," he amended. "I sense now that most regrettably is no longer the case. I find it hard to respect a two-faced scoundrel. If only my brother could see you as I do." Ferdinand blinked. "You wound me, Genevieve. That's your highness's to you. That's your highness to you. Let's not play a game of rank now, else I remind you that it is thanks to me that you were permitted to keep your title." "Thanks to you?" Genevieve scoffed. "Thanks to you, my husband died in shame. Thanks to you, my children were banished from Arules and robbed of their birthright." "It could have been much worse," replied Ferdinand smoothly. "Few get to spend their exile on an estate provided for by the king. And lo, now you've returned and most have forgotten the degree of your treachery. Even the king, it appears." She was struggling to keep her composure. Ferdinand noticed how taut her cheeks had become, how the pulse in her neck thickened and throbbed. She peeled off her glove one finger at a time. Her voice flat and wooden when she spoke next. "If you are trying to blackmail me, Ferdinand, go ahead. I don't care what anyone at court thinks of me, least of all my brother." "Not even your nephew? Your influence on young Charles is unacceptable. He doesn't understand what a threat your beliefs are to the future of this nation." To her credit, she barely flinched. "You dare to imply that I don't care about Arules? My family has ruled this country for centuries. My ancestors tilled and founded this nation with their blood and tears before yours first arrived. I'm not the only one. You've been away from court far too long, and yet now you frolic back into the palace and resume your position as the king's sister. Why now, Genevieve?" The Duchess set her teacup on its saucer with a sharp clatter. "Why don't you ask the little spy you've planted in my household?" Ferdinand choked on his coffee. Promptly reaching for his handkerchief, he blew his nose, then faced Genevieve, his posture stiffening. "What do you mean?" "Don't try to be coy. I know my attendant is one of your spies." "That innocent-looking creature?" Ferdinand spluttered, pretending to be offended. "She looks like she's barely spent a day out of the countryside. I wouldn't bother." "Yes, that's precisely why you picked her. But unfortunately for you, she's sharp enough to see you for what you are, a wolf in sheep's clothing. And she isn't afraid of the wolves." He raised a thick eyebrow. "Isn't she now? Where is the young lady, anyway?" "Cindergirl is at the library fetching a new novel for me." "A book?" "Yes, Ferdinand. Unlike you, I have hobbies other than scheming and conniving. Yes, I quite remember. You are more in the line of deceit and treason." "Why, you—" She stepped into his net, but he needed to proceed carefully if he was going to ensnare her. He clasped his hands together and rested them on his lap. In his smoothest, most all-knowing tone, he said, "After all these years, after publicly swearing you'd never return, there must be a reason you've come back." "I heard my nephew had come back from university. I wanted to see him." He didn't believe her, not for an instant. King George's sister was a skilled deceiver, and her denial was too quick. "You and I both know that is untrue." Ferdinand paused deliberately. "You forget it is I who have the king's ear and the council's trust. I am aware His Majesty is planning to pass the throne to Charles. That's why you're here." The barest of flinches flickered across Genevieve's face, but Ferdinand caught it. No matter how she denied it now, he had gleaned the truth. She pressed her lips tight. "I am here to help Charles find a wife." He needs to marry a princess, said Ferdinand, preferably a princess of one of Allura's neighboring kingdoms, such as Lourdes. King George has ruled for 40 years. No matter what kind of sovereign Charles turns out to be, the transition between reigns will be difficult. We must strengthen our position by allying ourselves with Lourdes so that our enemies do not pounce on any perceived weakness. Arules has been at peace for nearly half a century, Genevieve said calmly. What makes you think all of a sudden we have enemies that are eyeing our territories? We have been at peace because my father was vigilant, and I have carried on his task of safeguarding this kingdom from the likes of men such as your husband, who would open our gates to evil such as magic and a more powerful middle class, said Genevieve snidely. You seem rather sore, Ferdinand. The people are gaining more power, with or without magic. The riots will be contained. They are but a trifle compared to the chaos and instability magic would have brought. Fairies consider themselves above the law, what with their unnatural abilities in bringing aid to those they deem good and worthy. Yes, but if fairies happen to bless princesses and dukes, that's all right. A hierarchy of rank brings about order. Peasants don't deserve fairy guardians waving their problems away with magic wands. I think you had better leave. The Grand Duke pretended not to hear her. You and your late husband might as well have cursed Arule's future when you put the idea in the king's head to send the prince to university. Genevieve hissed at the Grand Duke. Cursed Arule's future? What century do you think you live in? Times are changing. Yes, which is exactly why we must remain vigilant. Mark my words, Charles is young and idealistic, and these ideas he's picked up of strengthening the country from within and empowering the people will bring ruin to Arules, just as your husband nearly brought ruin to this monarchy. Genevieve clenched her teeth. Her narrow face had grown tight with anger. You've overstayed your welcome, Ferdinand. Your coffee is cold. Quite so, in his most cordial tone, he said. I look forward to the party tomorrow night, Your Highness. Good day. He bowed, but she refused to acknowledge him. Just as well. She would be so angry for the rest of the day she'd want nothing to do but avoid him. While Genevieve was deciding on napkin colors and music selections for the masquerade tomorrow, he would make a few arrangements of his own. Arrangements that would ensure the future of this kingdom and, most important, his position in it. Chapter 19. Cinderella had to squeeze her way into the servants' quarters. So many girls had gathered, excitedly chattering, that she could hardly make out Louisa waving to her from the other side of the hall. Another ball! Can you believe it? That only means more work for us. There's no chance Madame will let us attend. She wouldn't even let us go to the first one. Cinderella moved faster, threading through the crowd towards Louisa and wishing she could shut her ears. She would have loved to drown in her daydreams. Every snippet of conversation she caught was about the prince. I hear he's looking for a new bride. So he's given up on the girl with the glass slipper? Darting away before she could hear an answer, Cinderella instantly berated herself. What do I care if the prince is looking for a new bride? I don't have any claim on him. Attention, rang Madame Ermina's voice. I have an announcement. All rumbling amongst the servants ceased. The women quieted, lining themselves against the walls to hear what their mistress had to say. And Cinderella hurried to Louisa's side. Many of you have heard already, so this will merely be a confirmation. Ermina drew a deep, dramatic breath. There is to be another ball tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, many of the girls repeated, unable to believe it. But we just, no buts. By the king's command, it is to be even grander than the one before it. Unfortunately, you know what that means. It means we'll be staying up all night at the palace, someone protested, polishing the silver and mopping the floors. Your duty is to the crown, said Ermina harshly. Anyone who objects will see themselves with a double shift and half pay for the rest of the month. She scanned the girls, one thin eyebrow raised as if daring anyone else to complain. Then she let out a breath. Now I know this is unexpected and will mean extra obligations for all. But if it is any consolation, the ball will be in the honor of Her Highness, the Duchess Genevieve d'Orléans, and it is to be a masquerade. A masquerade in honor of the Duchess? Cinderella's attention reeled. Had Duchess Genevieve changed her mind about suggesting a second ball to the king? She hadn't said anything about a ball welcoming her to Arula's, certainly not at such short notice. Then again, the king's sister had been irritable and curt ever since the night before. Cinderella wondered what could have upset her. "You look like you just ate a piece of bad cheese," Louisa said, elbowing Cinderella in the side. "I do?" Cinderella asked faintly. "You ought to be relieved. As the Duchess's attendant, you don't have to help with the cleaning or the sewing or the cooking. Only dressing your mistress to the nines, obliging her every whim and fancy, and helping her scour velours for the perfect mask to go with her hair." It took Cinderella a moment to realize her friend was joking. Louisa touched her shoulder. "I've heard the Duchess can be difficult. Let me know if you need any help with anything." "She isn't so bad," Cinderella replied. When Louisa gave her an incredulous look, she insisted, "Really?" "Before any of you get any ideas," continued Madame Ermina, "understand that anyone who is found sneaking off into the ball will be discharged immediately." Her gaze swept across the room. "I will not be as forgiving as I was the last time." "Aunt spoil sport," Louisa muttered. She turned to Cinderella, whispering, "Don't worry, we'll find a way to go." "I don't plan on going." "What?" Before Cinderella could reply, Ermina announced, "You are all dismissed." Then she spun to face the two girls. "Except you, Cinderella. A word." Cinderella blinked, unsure of what she could possibly want. Said Ermina, looking pointedly at Cinderella until she glanced down and realized her sash was crooked. Ermina waited until it was fixed before continuing. "You've lasted longer than I expected, and it appears Her Highness actually finds you a competent royal attendant. I have determined that you may stay, at least for the duration of Her Highness's visit." "Oh, thank you!" Cinderella clasped her hands together and nearly hugged Louisa's aunt. It wasn't as a permanent position, but it was a start. She'd continue to earn wages, and if she saved wisely, she might even be able to open a shop one day, like Louisa's mother. "Don't thank me." Madame Ermina didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. That was a start, Cinderella supposed. "You do your job, and you don't cause any mischief. Eyes to the ground and ears tuned to the bells. Understood?" As if on cue, the Duchess's call bell tolled, clattering loudly against the wall. "Now off with you. Make the Duchess happy so she doesn't give my girls any extra work before the masquerade." "I'll try," Cinderella promised, buoyed by Madame Ermina's newfound trust in her. Unfortunately, when Cinderella returned to the royal apartments, it appeared the Duchess was not in a better mood. "There you are," huffed Genevieve. "I thought I'd have to send a search party to get you." "I'm sorry, ma'am. Madame Ermina called us for a staff meeting. I didn't ask for an explanation, only that you be prompt." Cinderella's shoulders fell. Whatever rapport she had established with the Duchess of Orleans seemed long forgotten. For whatever reason, the king's sister was preoccupied by something that greatly vexed her. "It's getting late, and there is much for you to do before tomorrow." "Will you need a gown fitted, ma'am?" Cinderella asked as she tidied up the spread of teacups and empty plates scattered around Genevieve's sitting room. A gown? Whatever for?" "For the ball tomorrow night. Madame Ermina told us it was to be in your honor, so I thought you might want to try on your gown in advance." "Not now, Cinder Girl. I will tell you when I need a gown fitted. You do not decide." Thinking it would be wise to change topics, Cinderella said, "Did you have an enjoyable ride out into town yesterday?" She almost added with the prince, but she bit her tongue. Genevieve powdered her nose, then snapped the compact shut. "What did you do during your morning off, Cinder Girl?" "Me?" she stammered. I went to the library." "What for? I didn't ask for any books." "For myself, ma'am." Cinderella bit her tongue. Much as she liked the Duchess, she didn't dare tell her she'd been trying to learn more about magic to help her fairy godmother. "Now that I'm working in the palace, I wanted to learn more about Arule's history and about the people and the portraits I've seen in all the halls." "Bah! My family is hardly worth reading about." Is that what's been bothering you, ma'am? What's bothering me is my own business. Let me be. No, wait. A sigh. I'm not rankled at you. Is it the Grand Duke? Cinderella wondered, but she didn't dare ask. I would have thought that after 10 years the palace would have changed. Honestly, had I known that everyone here was still churlish and narrow-minded, I would never have come. Even George. Oh, he's been cordial enough to me and I to him, but we've been dancing around our past as if it never happened. Maybe you should talk to him about it. I should. She gave him a rose smile. But pride has always been my strong suit, you see, and George's too. I don't even remember who started the argument, not that it matters. Thankfully, Charles is more like his mother. He will make a fine husband and father one day. Cinderella's heart quickened a beat, but she said nothing. One day soon, added the Duchess. George is eager to have his son wed. Maybe tonight Charles will meet someone. Cinderella looked up at the Duchess, summoning her courage. Do you think the girl with the glass slipper will return? Do you think she should return? The Duchess wrinkled her nose. If you ask me, it'd be best if my nephew never saw that girl again. The word stung Cinderella. Yet how could she blame the Duchess? To her, to everyone, the identity of the elusive young lady dressed in a moonlight blue gown and glass slippers, who had riveted the entire ball and captured the heart of the prince, was a mystery. And the greater puzzle was why she, Cinderella, had vanished, leaving the prince heartbroken. Even Louisa was fascinated by the runaway princess, fascinated and also incredulous. She must be very rich and very powerful, she had said one evening while Cinderella was helping her finish some mending in the servants' quarters. Who else would run away from a chance to marry the Prince of Arules? Maybe she isn't either of those things, Cinderella reasoned. Maybe she was just a regular girl, like you or me, who stumbled upon the chance of a lifetime to go to a royal ball. Regular girls like you or me don't have a gown so fine, especially not the one that fits so perfectly, said Louisa sensibly, taking a seamstress's point of view. Someone could have given it to her. Ha! Then Louisa tilted her head, considering. Let's imagine you're right. Let's say she's a common girl like us. Maybe she fled because she was afraid. Afraid? It'd be the only reasonable explanation. Say the prince fell in love with me. I'd be thrilled beyond all measure, but well, I'm not so naive as to think it would amount to anything. A prince marries princesses, not some palace seamstress. Cinderella couldn't think of a response, so she simply nodded, her neck wooden as her head bobbed up and down. Only she knew the truth. She fled because of what her fairy godmother had told her, that magic only lasted so long and her magnificent clothes and carriage would become rags and a pumpkin upon the stroke of midnight. Then again, more than once she'd wondered what would have happened if she'd stayed past midnight. Would Charles have accepted her, or would the sight of her in rags have mortified him? Maybe Louisa was right and she had been afraid. Maybe she didn't want to know the answer. It was better this way, keeping the prince as a cherished memory. She needed to protect herself. She experienced enough heartache to last her a lifetime. She returned her attention to the Duchess, who had dipped into her armoire, flipping through the many fine garments she had brought to the palace. Everyone is inordinately obsessed with this girl, said Genevieve, unaware of the thought spooling in Cinderella's mind. Another reason to hold a second ball. Charles needs to move on and forget the spineless glass slipper lady. Spineless? Cinderella echoed, heat rising to her cheeks. Why do you think she's spineless? A girl who runs off on my nephew must be hiding something. What if she didn't know he was your nephew? Asked Cinderella carefully. Genevieve lifted a skeptical eyebrow. Even so, a potential princess of Arules cannot afford to have secrets. The court would eat her alive if she were anything less than perfect. Trust me, I would know. She must be a model of courage, grace, and virtue. A princess who runs off like that and refuses to come forth is not a paragon of any of the three. I'm sure she had good reason. Believe what you wish, said the Duchess, withdrawing a deep emerald gown from her closet. Have the collar mended before the masquerade. I don't need a fitting. I've been wearing this dress since before you were born, and it still fits. As she folded the gown into a small trunk, Cinderella hesitated. Do you think the prince loves her? I think he's in love with the idea of her, replied the Duchess flippantly. her words echoing Cinderella's fears. If she were to return to the ball, I am certain he would propose marriage, but that's only because George is forcing him to. Forcing him to? Cinderella's ears began to ring uncontrollably, the words repeating over and over in her head. She sucked in a breath to calm herself. What do you mean? My brother is the one behind the royal proclamation and the ball. George is in such a rush for Charles to find a wife that he vowed my nephew would wed the girl who fit the glass slipper. Honestly, from what I know about this girl, I don't think such a union would be good for Charles or for Arules. Cinderella's hands, clenching the sides of the trunk, shook, and she had to fight to keep her voice from trembling. I see. Then let's hope she doesn't appear tomorrow. With the hastiest curtsy she could manage, Cinderella hurried out of the room, ignoring the Duchess's call. Cindergirl, I wasn't finished with you. Cinderella needed to breathe. Everything felt suddenly hot, and she desperately needed some fresh air, needed to clear her mind of what the Duchess had told her. Her heart ached with disappointment, and try as she might, she shouldn't reason it away with the away she had whenever. Try as she might, she couldn't reason it away the way she had whenever her stepmother hurt her. This was new, deeper than the sting of when Charles hadn't recognized her in the palace. To learn that the entire ball had been a ruse to find Charles a wife, that he had all but been forced to choose someone. No, that wasn't the surprising part. That wasn't the hurtful part. What hurt was that Charles had picked her simply because he had to pick someone. And now, if there were another ball, he'd choose the next girl who caught his eye. Maybe she had taken their connection that night for granted. But had he never cared about her in the first place? Of course, there was the fact that he hadn't recognized her. Days later, the pain from seeing him spin away from her and disappear down the corridor as if she were a perfect stranger was still fresh. Cinderella's head throbbed, and she clutched the trunk, holding the Duchess's dress tighter. Did she care about him? She thought she did. But how many young men had she met while under the stepmother's charge? None. The prince was the first. He'd been so charming, listening to her attentively as if she were the most important person in the world and not a servant to be ordered about or treated with callous contempt. His easy smile and warm eyes had won her over, and now here she was, still thinking about him. Maybe she was naive to expect he felt the same as she did, that they had shared something special. Truth be told, it would be foolish of him to marry someone he'd only met once. Besides, she knew nothing about being a princess, and she spent enough years under her stepmother's pitiless eyes. She didn't need to spend the rest of her life under an entire country's. Cinderella stopped at one of the windows, pressing her head against the cool glass. Outside, the gardens beckoned. Bathed under the cloak of moonlight, they were breathtaking. The hedges rustled under the dim lamplight, swaying to an invisible symphony, and the marble pavilions shone white as pearls. It was late enough that no one would be passing through now. Perhaps she could cut across and make a short detour before heading to her room. Being outside would help her think clearly again. After a long breath, Cinderella pulled away from the window, making for the two doors leading outside of the gardens. She waited for the guard to open them, but he met her gaze with a penetrating glare. When she tried to enter the doors, he stepped in front of her. "What is your business here?" Cinderella blinked, unsure why the guard had taken such a sharp tone with her. "I wanted to walk out in the gardens back to the servants' quarters." The guard peered at her as if she uttered the most foolish thing he'd ever heard. Servants are not permitted to access the royal gardens, not without express permission. Cinderella took a step back. So the entire garden is off limits, even to the staff? But it's even larger than the palace. The palace is not yours to roam, the garden admonished. There are rules to respect, traditions to honor. Cinderella raised her chin, but she knew it was no use arguing. Without another word, she turned away and continued to her quarters, her heart even heavier than before. Being around nature had always lifted her spirits. She had grown up helping her mother tend the flowers in their garden, which had once been the pride and joy of the family estate. But after her stepmother had fired her father's staff to save on expenses, the entire yard had fallen to disarray. Who has any use for a garden? Lady Tremaine would say. The flowers can't be sold. Let them die. Cinderella tried as long as she could to maintain the garden, rising before the sun to nurture her mother's rose bushes and tulips. But one morning, she found the entire garden trampled by Lucifer. Back then, she blamed it on the cat, but now she knew better. Knowing how much her mother's garden meant to her, Lady Tremaine must have let Lucifer loose on the flowers. By the time Cinderella discovered what he'd done, the garden had been destroyed, and Lady Tremaine had ordered Cinderella to clean up the dirt. The very next day, her stepmother had a brick path laid over the area so that another garden might never grow there again. The memory still stung, even after all these years, and Cinderella pushed it away. Her stepmother didn't deserve another second of her time, not even in her thoughts. Before long, she returned to her room. Setting aside the Duchess's gown, she sat on her bed to give her tired feet a short rest. Work in the palace wasn't half as strenuous as it had been at home with her stepmother and stepsisters, yet Cinderella hadn't been sleeping well. There was so much she'd missed during her unhappy years with Lady Tremaine. Now that she was free, there was so much she wanted to do. There was so much she could do. She wanted to see the world and to help others who might have felt as lonely and trapped as she had. She didn't want to have to force herself to smile anymore, just to bear each day. She wanted to find out what truly made her laugh and what truly made her happy. She wanted to get to the heart of things, to find the truth instead of turn a blind eye. She drew a deep breath then, wiping the tears from her cheeks, and got up from her bed. Duchess Genevieve must be wondering what had happened to her. Cinderella faced her reflection in the mirror. I'm not alone anymore. I have Louisa, the girls from the palace, even Duchess Genevieve. Then why am I still crying? Because every time she dared hope for something, for some glimmer of happiness, it slipped her grasp, almost like stardust. Whenever she reveled in something of her father and mother's, Lady Tremaine sold it or destroyed it. When the Grand Duke was searching for her to bring her to the palace, Lady Tremaine locked her in her tower. When she had finally dared hope someone might care for her, it turned out to be part of a larger ploy. Could any happiness she found actually last beyond midnight? As she splashed her face, trying to wash the redness from her eyes, a shadow flickered behind her. A warm light swelled from the darkness so bright it illuminated her entire room. Startled, Cinderella turned around, only to find her fairy godmother waiting behind her. Fairy godmother, she breathed, embracing the older woman. There, there, Lenora stroked her hair. I heard you crying, and I felt... She revealed her wand. It felt your sadness. Why the tears, my dear? Nothing, said Cinderella quickly. When Lenora raised an eyebrow, she sighed and explained. I found out the ball was just a scheme for the prince to find a bride, and now there's going to be another one. Isn't that wonderful news? You can see him again. She swallowed. A hard lump lodged in her throat. No, I'm not allowed to go. Besides, I don't want to go. It's just a silly ball, and I want to leave that part of my past behind me. What makes you think it's a silly ball? I have a job in the palace, Cinderella continued without answering. A touch of pride edged her voice as she said, and I'm free of my stepmother to lead my own life. I wouldn't want to run into her again. Lenora's shoulders softened. My child, she murmured, you needn't fear her. I know, but... Cinderella pursed her lips. She didn't want to talk about her stepmother anymore. She had so many questions for her fairy godmother. I have another dream, too. One to help people, like you. Like me? You told me that magic was forbidden, and when I went to the royal archives, the librarian said that everything to do with magic has been destroyed. Oh, fairy godmother, what happened all those years ago? What happened to magic? And to you? Lenora sighed, taking a moment to gather herself. Then she looked at Cinderella with a sad glimmer in her eyes. When I was your age, there were many fairies in Arules. Good ones, mostly. We fairy godparents were emissaries to the human world, using our magic to help keep the peace across kingdoms. But there were a few rotten fairies, ones that caused mischief with their curses and dark magic. Because of them, the people of Arules started mistrusting us as a whole. The situation became so dire that they began hunting us and killing us. The fairy godmother swallowed visibly. and Cinderella reached out to comfort her. I didn't know, said Cinderella. You couldn't have. The King's Council had done its very best to wipe magic's existence from the entire country. Most people have already forgotten what it was like. Did everyone have a fairy godmother like you? Not everyone, she replied, but your grandmother was good to me even when others began to hunt my kind. She sheltered me so I could stay in Arules, and when she gave birth to your mother, I swore to repay her kindness by watching over Gabrielle and becoming her godmother, a connection that is not forged lightly. Sadly, as things grew worse, I had no choice but to leave. When I finally gathered enough courage to return, Gabrielle was all grown up with a daughter of her own. Is it dangerous still? Should you be here? I don't want you to get in trouble, fairy godmother. Oh, child, Lenora laughed sadly, not quite answering the question. I owe your family so much. What I regret most was not being here when your mother needed me. Cinderella held her breath as her fairy godmother went on. You meant everything to Gabrielle. After you were born, I thought she'd finally achieved her happily ever after. I'll never forgive myself for that mistake, for thinking I could find some new goddaughters and godsons in other kingdoms, and they could replace your mother in my heart. It wasn't your fault, Cinderella said gently. You were forced to leave. I was a coward, Lenora said. I was afraid of losing my wand. It becomes like a part of you, magic. And we fairies had decided long ago to leave, or else risk losing our wands, or worse. So we left. I left even before magic became illegal. Others were not quite so lucky, forced to leave their homes, their loved ones, with no plan in place. Lenora removed her hood, letting it settle over her shoulders. Years later, I sensed something was amiss with my Gabrielle. I borrowed enough magic to make a quick trip back to see her, and lo, upon my return, I learned your mother had fallen gravely ill. I arrived the day your father took you away so you wouldn't catch her sickness. I stayed with her as long as I could, but there was nothing I could do, and for the first time, I could understand why so many resent my magic. Why? Because magic can only aid someone's fate, not change it. Cinderella's chest tightened, and my mother's fate was to... Yes, my child, I'm afraid so. Lenora turned aside to wipe away the moisture from her eyes. After Gabrielle passed away, I was so grief-stricken that I did not visit your father's household for many years. I convinced myself it was just that, the inevitable sorrow that follows a loss, which explained the shroud of darkness emanating from your household. Too late, I learned that it was so much more. I blame myself now for the years you endured under that awful woman, her stepmother. Cinderella inhaled. She clenched her fist, anger stirring inside her when she thought of all the years she endured under Lady Tremain's cruelty, and all the years her fairy godmother must have endured because of the country's twisted thoughts about magic. It was not your fault, said Cinderella, taking her fairy godmother's hands in her own. You've already done more for me and my family than we could have ever asked for. I am in a better place now. Yes, said Lenora quietly. She shook her head. But remember, happiness isn't just a smile. You can't force it to come true. The words made Cinderella's heart ache. I wish I'd realized that earlier. Lenora squeezed Cinderella's hand. Do what makes you happy, Cinderella. That is what I want for you. That was what I was hoping to help you with when I first came to you. Go to this masquerade ball with your new friends, put on a pretty gown and dance the night away. Sneak out into the royal gardens and drink tea under the moonlight. Get lost in the streets of Valores and spend some of your wages on something that'll make you happy to look at every morning. Even the small joys are worth cherishing, and they will lead you to greater ones. But I want to help you, said Cinderella. I want magic to return to Arules. Lenora shook her head sadly. That would take a miracle. You once told me miracles take a little time. Well, perhaps not this one. Cinderella wouldn't give up. Why does the Grand Duke hate fairies so much? Why did the king exile you from Arules? That is a story for another time, Cinderella. Her godmother patted her shoulders and then, with a flick of her wand, began to vanish. Focus on your own happiness. Find your own miracle. But, Cinderella started, Lenora stopped her with a sad smile. Then the fairy godmother touched her forehead to Cinderella's and disappeared. I'm going to go ahead and stop there, and I will start on chapter 20 for the next one. And I hope you guys are enjoying this so far. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you all have a blessed morning, day, evening, night, wherever you are listening to this from. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.